You are standing outside. The wind hits you before you even open your eyes. It is not cold the way a winter morning feels cold. It is the kind of cold that reaches inside your chest and squeezes. The kind that turns your exhaled breath into a cloud that disappears before you can track it. The kind that has been doing this, without pause, for tens of thousands of years. This is the Ice Age. And somehow, your ancestors not only survived it, they thrived. For roughly 100,000 years, vast sheets of ice covered large parts of North America, Europe, and Asia. In some places, glaciers reached 2 miles thick. Sea levels dropped by more than 400 feet as water locked itself into ice. Entire ecosystems shifted. Forests retreated, grasslands expanded. And the humans alive during this period, anatomically modern Homo sapiens, and for a time, Neanderthals, had no shelter beyond what they could build with their hands, no heat beyond what they could make from friction and dry tinder, and no food beyond what they could track, kill, and eat before it froze. How did they do it? Start with shelter, because this is where most people assume the story ends. They imagine cave people living in caves, and they are half right. Caves were used, but not the way you might think. Archaeologists excavating sites like the Cro-Magnon rock shelter in France and Blombos Cave in South Africa have found evidence that humans used natural rock formations as windbreaks and insulated rear walls, not as permanent homes, but as seasonal base camps. The deep interior of a cave is not warm. It is cold and damp year-round. What made a cave useful was its entrance, a recessed overhang that blocked wind and retained radiated heat from a fireplace just inside the mouth. But most Ice Age humans were not living near caves at all. They were living on open tundra. And so they built. The Mammoth bone houses discovered at Mezhirich in modern-day Ukraine, excavated by archaeologist Ihor Pidoplichko, beginning in the 1960s, are among the most remarkable structures in all of prehistory. These were not simple piles of bones. They were engineered dwellings, circular frameworks built from the interlocked skulls, jawbones, and tusks of woolly mammoths, covered with hides and insulated with moss and earth. Each structure housed multiple people. Each required the bones of dozens of mammoths, meaning these communities had been hunting, accumulating, and planning over long periods. This was not desperation. This was architecture. Inside those structures, fire was everything. Humans had been using fire for hundreds of thousands of years before the Ice Age, but the glacial period forced a new relationship with it. Fire was not a luxury. It was a metabolic necessity. Your body, even with clothing, loses heat faster in extreme cold than your internal organs can produce it. Without a sustained heat source, hypothermia sets in within hours. Paleoanthropologist Andrew Sorensen and his colleagues, studying wear patterns on flint tools from sites across Europe, found direct evidence of fire-starting technology. Specialized strikers used with iron pyrite to produce sparks, dating back at least 50,000 years. These were not accidental fires. These were tools made specifically to create fire on demand, even in wet conditions, even in wind. And the fuel they burned tells its own story. At sites across the treeless Mammoth steppe, researchers have found evidence of bone burning. When wood is scarce or absent, large animal bones, particularly those of mammoths, rich in fat even after the flesh is gone, burn hot and long. Your ancestors were not just eating the megafauna of the Ice Age. They were using every part: the meat for food, the hides for clothing and shelter, the bones for building and burning. Clothing deserves its own paragraph, because without it, nothing else matters. There are no Ice Age garments preserved in the archaeological record. Organic materials simply do not survive 20,000 years. But the indirect evidence is overwhelming. Bone needles, thin, precisely tapered with a small eye at one end, appear in the fossil record across Europe and Asia, starting around 50,000 years ago. These are not tools for rough stitching. They are tools for close seam tailoring. Anthropologist Olga Sofer, studying Upper Paleolithic figurines from sites across Eastern Europe, identified impressions of woven textiles and net-like structures on clay figurines. Evidence that Ice Age humans were weaving plant fibers into fabric alongside working animal hides. The furs they wore were almost certainly fitted, layered, and tied, not draped. Tight wrist cuffs, close-fitting hoods, layered underlayers. The same design principles used by Arctic peoples today, arrived at independently over tens of thousands of years of freezing winters. Now think about food, because the cold changes everything about how nutrition works. In extreme cold, your body burns calories at a dramatically elevated rate simply to maintain core temperature. A sedentary person in mild weather needs roughly 2,000 calories a day. In sustained cold, engaged in physical activity, that number climbs toward 4,000 to 6,000 calories. Ice Age humans were not eating grains and vegetables in large quantities. Those food sources were severely limited by the cold. They were eating meat, high-fat meat, Researchers studying the isotopic signatures locked in Ice Age human bones, a method pioneered in part by anthropologist Michael Richards at institutions including the Max Planck Institute, found that the diet of European Ice Age humans was heavily animal-based, comparable in protein and fat ratios to modern Arctic populations like the Inuit. Fat was not something to avoid. Fat was survival currency. They hunted woolly mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer, horses, and bison. The megafauna of the Ice Age were not just food. They were the economy. Their bones built houses. Their hides built clothing and shelter. Their fat fueled lamps and fires. Their ivory became needles, beads, figurines, and flutes. The relationship was total, which brings you to something most people never consider: the social survival. Humans are not physiologically equipped to survive the Ice Age alone. You cannot hunt a mammoth alone. You cannot build a mammoth bone house alone. You cannot keep a fire burning through the night alone. You cannot sew the layered fitted clothing required for survival alone. Certainly not while also processing hides and caring for children and moving camp with the season. The fundamental survival technology of the Ice Age was not fire or clothing or shelter. It was the group. Ethnographer James Woodburn, studying modern hunter-gatherer bands, and archaeologists tracking the movement patterns of Paleolithic groups through lithic, stone tool, source analysis, have found that Ice Age human groups maintained wide-ranging social networks. Flint from specific quarry sites shows up hundreds of miles from its origin, indicating regular long-distance trade and contact between groups. In hard times, a brutal winter, a failed hunt, a disease that swept through a camp, these networks were lifelines. Other groups provided food, partners, information about animal migration, and, crucially, genetic diversity. And then there is the question no one expects to have an answer to. What did they do in the dark? Inside those mammoth bone shelters, in the long Ice Age night that could last 18 hours in winter, your ancestors were not simply surviving. Excavations at sites like Przedmosty in the Czech Republic and Dolní Věstonice, a site yielding fired clay figurines dating to 26,000 years ago, among the oldest ceramics on Earth, reveal communities that were making art, music, and ritual objects in the depths of the Ice Age. Bone flutes, Venus figurines, ochre-painted shells worn as jewelry. These are not the outputs of a species focused only on survival. These are the outputs of a species that found meaning in the dark, warmth in story, and connection in shared objects passed between hands. Here is the twist that reframes everything. The Ice Age did not thin humanity out. It sculpted it. The extreme selective pressure of 100,000 years of cold, the cooperative problem-solving required, the planning required, the tool innovation required, the social intelligence required, may have been one of the crucibles in which modern human cognition was forged. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that cooking and the control of fire fundamentally changed the human brain over evolutionary time by making digestion more efficient and freeing metabolic resources for neural growth. The Ice Age did not just test the brain that evolution had built. It may have helped build that brain. You live in a heated room. You have insulated walls and a thermostat and a refrigerator full of food and a bed with a blanket. You have outsourced to technology what your ancestors carried in their hands and in their relationships and in the fat reserves of an animal they tracked for 3 days through the snow. The Ice Age is not ancient history. It is in your mitochondria, the cellular machinery that converts fuel to heat, tuned over hundreds of thousands of years of cold. It is in your preference for fatty food, your social instincts, your ability to plan for a future you cannot see. Every winter morning you pull a blanket tighter before you get up. You are echoing something very old. You wake up when your body is ready. Outside, it is cold, and somewhere, deep in your cells, something remembers exactly what to do.